Every day, religious Jews recite these words in prayer. I believe in perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, and even though he delays, yet every day I'll wait for him, believing that he'll come. Jews have been waiting for the coming of the Messiah for 2,000 years, and still he hasn't arrived. Or has he? There are religious Jews living right here in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, that believe that their spiritual leader is the Messiah, even though he died in 1994. Some even say he rose from the dead. Could it be true? Everyone longs for peace and justice. Everyone desires an end of war and hatred. The Bible speaks of a day when the wolf will lie down with the lamb and the lion with the goat. It speaks of a day when the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. It speaks of a time when nation will not take up sword against nation and people will not learn war anymore. Jews call this the Messianic era. It'll be inaugurated by the Messiah himself, a descendant of the ancient King David. But how will we recognize him? What will he look like when he comes? And is it possible in our fervent desire to see the Messiah come that we could put our trust in the wrong person?
Dr. Brown brought his cameras to the streets of New York City with one question in mind. Do you think Jesus is the Messiah?
I believe Jesus Christ is the Messiah.
I also believe Jesus Christ is the Messiah.
I think he was a great man, and he was misinterpreted, in my opinion. But it's only my opinion.
I do believe that he's already come. I do believe he was a man on this earth. I do believe that he saved a lot of people. I do think he was the Messiah. However, I do think there is going to be another Messiah that's going to come. Who that's going to be, no person on this world knows.
I'm not sure there is a Messiah. Come or not to come, I'm not that certain of it. That's part of our Jewish mythology.
I believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. Yes, I do. I believe he's the Messiah.
That's a superstar. Jesus Christ is a superstar. Who hasn't heard of Jesus Christ? You know what I'm saying? It's a household name. Jesus is everything everybody say he is, but not what they fight for him to be. You know what I'm saying? That's what I think personally. Kind of deep, you know, I ain't trying to get too deep.
I believe that he has come and he will come again.
Yeah, he has, and he will come back.
I think it will be a great thing if Jesus Christ will come as the Messiah. I would love it.
Think about it. As we cry out for the coming of the Messiah, especially in times of intense suffering, it's all too easy for us to put our trust in the wrong person. There's some Hasidic Jews here in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, who believe that their rabbi, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, commonly known as the Rebbe, really is the Messiah, even though he died before inaugurating the Messianic era. Others say no matter how great a figure he was, he couldn't be the Messiah. Let's take a look at one of the most famous false messiahs in Jewish history before we examine the messianic credentials of the Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson. The story begins with a man who became known as the mystical Messiah, Shabbatai Tzvi, born in Smyrna in 1626. According to the legend, he was born on the 9th day of the month of Av, which, according to Jewish tradition, was to be the birth date of the Messiah. He seemed to be quite an unusual character. In fact, it seems that he was a manic depressive. He would have these terrible bouts of emotional torment and depression, only to rise into these glorious heights of ecstasy and joy. And it was during those times of ecstasy he claimed to receive special revelations from God. At that time, many of the Jews lived in extreme poverty, and there was also severe persecution. Sometimes whole Jewish communities were wiped out. There was also an increase in Jewish mysticism, giving rise to speculation about unseen spiritual things. It seemed like the time was ripe for a man like Shabbatai. Even his own struggle seemed to point to his battle with demonic powers. He also had a prophet, Nathan of Gaza, who claimed in 1665 that he received a revelation that Shabbatai was actually the Messiah. And he began to proclaim all of his miracles, and the following, even among the rich and the poor, even among some rabbis, began to rise. So there was a wave of momentum, and Shabbatai thought this is the time. He was going to go to Constantinople and announce to the Sultan that he was the Messiah, ordering the Sultan to bow down to him. Instead, he was put in jail. He was tolerated for a while and finally given an ultimatum. And the ultimatum was simply this: convert to Islam or die. amazingly, Shabbatai converted to Islam. And not just him, many of his followers also did the same thing. They converted to Islam. You say, how in the world could that happen? Well, there's a Talmudic tradition that says that the Messiah will come and the world is perfectly righteous or perfectly wicked. And because of the fact that the world was not worthy to receive him in its righteousness, it had to become wicked. So he was going to lead the apostasy into Islam and usher in the final wickedness and hence inaugurate the Messiah. And what's really wild is to this day, there are followers of Shabbatai who are living secret lives among the Muslims. At least it was attested well into the 20th century. How in the world could people be so deceived? The last 50 years, Messianic expectation has been on the rise. The horrors of the Holocaust, which were almost supernatural in their dimension, caused many Jews to say, how long? And then the rebirth of the modern state of Israel gave hope. Maybe the era of redemption is coming near. Even today, it seems the whole world is focused on Israel. There's controversy over Jerusalem. There are calls for the extermination of the Jews. Then there are extreme natural disasters, and the threat of a nuclear holocaust. Seems like the whole world is shaking. But something very special happened in 1991. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, announced to his followers, I've done everything I can to bring in the era of Mashiach, the era of Messiah. I'm handing over the mission to you. It's up to you now to bring in the Messianic era, to bring in the Messiah. And they began to wonder, could he be the man? Many of his followers were sure, this is King Messiah.
Not many Hasidic Jews in Crown Heights were willing to share their comments on camera. The man you're about to see spoke with Dr. Brown, but his interview was abruptly ended by a senior member of the community.
So the question is, there was belief that Rebbe could be Mashiach.
Right.
And is it possible that he is Mashiach? Is he the Messiah? Okay. So you can go ahead.
Right. So again, I think the first thing we have to understand is, from a Jewish point of view, what is Mashiach? Mashiach is a Jewish leader, somebody who is completely dedicated to God's teaching.
Is he divine or just a human being?
Human being,
okay.
Absolutely human being. And we have actually a code written by Maimonides. He was in the 11th century. It tells us what to expect in a Messianic leader, and it talks about a human being.
So the Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Malachim, 11th
right.
chapter.
Chapter
right.
11, right.
Okay.
It says very clearly what to expect. Somebody who is completely dedicated to God's teaching, who upholds the teaching, who repairs any missing links of things that have been forgotten in the teaching, who brings the people closer to observance, and then we can begin to look at that person as a leader.
So if there's a Jewish leader who himself is a holy, righteous person that is starting to bring Jews back to Torah observance, and it's happening more and more and more, maybe he could be.
That's the first thing. And then it says that he fights wars on behalf of the Jewish people. And he builds.
Does it have to be physical wars?
No, not necessarily physical wars, but spiritual wars, but sometimes, certainly battles.
Okay.
It takes on contentious issues and pushes to resolve them in the appropriate way. And maybe sometimes literally wars too. Remember that Israel itself has been engaged in many wars. Mm-hmm. The Rebbe has been front and center in sending his people to encourage the troops on the front, in giving ideas to the political leadership and the military leadership about which ways to persecute that war. I mean, any king who leads the people in war doesn't necessarily go on the front line himself and hold a gun. He's been involved in defending the Jewish people against many threats.
So he brings Jews back to Torah observance, he fights the wars of the Lords, and then rebuilds the temple.
Rebuilding the temple and the ingathering of the exiles.
So if the other things happen, he's definitely Mashiach. If he does all of those.
That's part one. Then if he is successful in fighting those wars and he actually builds the temple, then we know for sure that he's the Mashiach, right?
So the traditional objection,
right?
One of the objections against Jesus is he couldn't be Mashiach because he died before inaugurating the Messianic era. But there's some Lubavitchers that still believe Rebbe is Mashiach, even though he didn't complete the mission. He did things no other Jew in generations had done, but he didn't complete the mission. So according to the Rambam's explanation, doesn't he fall short?
Well, I think that first, we're talking now about Mashiach from a Jewish point of view. And if we go to the Rambam, The one thing is clear is that he has to uphold the law. If someone who sends out pieces of matzah before Passover to encourage Jews to observe Passover, somebody's encouraging Jews to observe the Sabbath on Saturday, on the seventh day, as it has been since the beginning, somebody who is building observance, it's in the ballpark. I'm not aware that the people you're referring to ever did anything in that vein to bring people closer
Right,
to
so there would be an argument
so
that
you can't even get to line 1.
So followers
you're
of
going
Jesus
to line
went away from Torah, they threw out the commandments, would be your viewpoint. Let's see if he signs. Hang on.
Your mother Jewish?
I'm a Jew, okay?
And you should bury your head in the sand and be ashamed to be associated with this.
Listen, here, you want to see the permit?
Disgusting.
There's nothing disgusting. You're prejudging everything. Okay, things got a little testy there in Crown Heights. We actually had to get out of the area. So we've made our way over to Central Park where we can just regather our thoughts and get back to our subject. So what about the Messiah? According to Moses Maimonides, writing in the 12th century, this is how he'd be recognized. He'd be a learned and godly king who would bring all of Israel into Torah observance. He'd fight the wars of the Lord. He'd rebuild the temple. He'd regather the exiles. Whoever did all this was surely the Messiah. So how does Rabbi Schneerson line up with these requirements? Without a doubt, he was an extraordinary Jewish leader. He accomplished amazing things in his 92 years of life, born in 1902 and died in 1994. Came to America in 1941. In 1951, he became the leader of the Lubavitcher sect of Hasidic Jews, and he transformed this small group into a worldwide power. He was considered to be a brilliant scholar and a saintly rabbi and an organizational genius, and he was a charismatic leader who could stir his followers into a frenzy of devotion. Under his leadership, thousands of Jewish day schools and outreach centers were established around the world, wherever Jews are found. Tens of thousands of Jews became observant through his efforts. And he was the 7th Rebbe in his line. He had no children, making him the last. And there was mystical speculation about the messianic credentials of the 7th Rebbe. He was also considered a prophet. So in 1991, when he announced that the era of Mashiach, the era of Messiah, was at hand, many of his followers said, surely he's the one. And then the unthinkable happened. In 1992, he had a severe stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed and completely mute. How could this be? Well, many of the Rebbe's followers were sure he had to be the Messiah. After all, he had done more for traditional Jewish education than any Jew in modern history, and he'd helped so many thousands of non-traditional Jews embrace Judaism. Even the President of the United States and the Congress recognized his work. Surely he'd fulfill the rest of his mission. His followers set up a messianic hotline. Call this 800 number and get the latest news about the Rebbe. They wore pagers around the world, waiting for the news that he had risen from his sickness and was about to reveal himself in glory and lead them back to Israel. They even took out full-page ads in the New York Times, urging Jews to hasten the redemption. Yet the Rebbe remained ill. He was paralyzed and mute, and it forced his followers to look back into the Bible to see if the scriptures foretold the Rebbe's sufferings. It appeared that they did. Isaiah 53 said the servant of the Lord would be stricken with pain and illness for our sake, and it said that he'd be silent, like a lamb being led to the slaughter. It looked like the Bible predicted what would happen to the Rebbe. And then the great shock, 1994, he died. His followers were expecting him to be raised up full of health and strength. Instead, he died the death of a frail old man. Immediately, a biography was written about the Rebbe, stating that his death brought atonement to his generation, and everywhere there was speculation. Did he really die, or was his death just an illusion to test the faith of his followers? Others said he rose from the dead. If you go to his gravesite, you won't find anything there. Others began to speak about his return. Others even prayed to him, saying that he carried the essence of God in human form. There was one big problem with all this. For 2,000 years, Jews had rejected another messianic claimant because he died before fulfilling his mission. They rejected the notion that his death was an atonement for the world. They rejected talk of his resurrection, his return. They rejected talk that he bore the image of God in human form. Of course, I'm speaking about Jesus, called Christ because Christ is the Greek way of speaking about the Messiah. And now the Rebbe's followers were pointing to the same scriptures that Christians used to show that Jesus, Yeshua, was really the Messiah. Maybe we need to go back to the Bible and re-examine these texts. Our search for the Messiah takes an interesting turn.
Dr. Brown and his camera crew faced open hostility in the Hasidic Jewish community of Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Prior to leaving the area, one Jewish man was willing to share his thoughts on camera.
It's a good question. I believe it could be either way. I don't know if you've probably heard by now, but speaking to people here, you've probably heard already that according to the Talmud, the Talmud says that Mashiach, the Messiah, could come from the living or from those who have passed on already. So it tends not to be a popularly accepted one, but nonetheless it is a legitimate opinion in the Talmud, which goes back, almost 2,000 years ago. I believe he certainly could be. He was, certainly while he was alive in a physical body, he was probably the #1 candidate, according to Maimonides, the Rambam, and who actually lists the different criteria that the Messiah has to fulfill. Well, I think, unfortunately, that most people don't know the authentic Torah verses. So you have a lot of Jews who they themselves don't know the authentic Hebrew. So you see a lot of the things were actually mistranslated. Like one of the classic ones is that talks about the virgin birth, the virgin, but the Hebrew word for that in the Psalms is not Betula, which means virgin, but Alma, which means a young lady. So I think that there's many of those circumstances that you find that people, the idea of Mashiach is an authentic Torah concept. The idea of a soul and resurrection of the dead, those are real authentic Jewish Torah concepts that many Jews are not aware of. So they see it very often in other places, and then they become attracted to that. And I'm not saying that there's nothing positive there. There is, but and there's certainly a lot of similarities between what we known as the Judeo-Christian tradition. A lot of what this country is founded on. So there's a lot of similarities. I just think that many people are unaware of, those refer to the King James Version of the Bible or the English version, the Greek version, but they don't know what the authentic Hebrew version is, which they end up, they end up missing a huge point by not knowing the authentic Hebrew.
Let's go back to the words of the prophet Isaiah. He wrote hundreds of years before the time of Jesus, and he spoke of one who'd be despised and rejected, who'd suffer and die and rise from the dead. And initially, we Jewish people would think he was a wicked man dying for his own sins, and then we'd realize he was dying for our sins. Get a water, please. Thank you. To be honest, that sounds a lot more like Jesus than Rabbi Schneerson, but unfortunately, Jesus didn't fulfill the rest of the messianic requirements, at least according to Moses Maimonides. Could it be that the rabbis had put more trust in the words of Maimonides than the words of the Bible? Could it be that the great Maimonides failed to give a complete picture of the Messiah and his mission? You see, Isaiah said the servant who would suffer and die and be rejected and rise from the dead would also be accepted by the Gentiles, that he would be a light to the ends of the earth. Did you catch that? The Gentiles would recognize him as the Messiah before the Jewish people did. And Isaiah said that he would suffer and die before he would be highly exalted. That's where Christians got this idea of a first coming and a second coming. And the only one who can fulfill the rest of the mission, the second part of the mission, is the one who fulfilled the first part of the mission. It's Jesus, Yeshua of Nazareth. He's the only candidate.
Do I know who the rabbi is? No.
The rabbi? No.
No.
Yes, Schneerson, Rabbi Schneerson.
Do I know who the Rebbe is? No.
No.
No, I have not.
I've never heard of the Rebbe.
I do not know who the Rebbe is now.
The Rebbe? I don't know who that is.
No sé quién es el Rebbe.
Menachem Mendel Schneerson is a rabbi who has set down some guidelines or teachings that I think most of the Orthodox rabbis, at least in the greater New York area, follow.
Have I ever heard of Jesus Christ? Yes.
Yes, Jesus Christ, we know.
I've heard of him. Do I know who Jesus Christ is? Yes.
Yes, I do.
I absolutely know who Jesus Christ is.
Yeah, I know who Jesus Christ is.
Sí, sé quién es Jesucristo.
Without a doubt, Rabbi Schneerson was a very important religious figure, and he helped a lot of people. But his importance fades into oblivion when compared with Rabbi Yeshua, Jesus. I mean, just do an internet search for the Rebbe, you get a few 100,000 hits. Do a search for Jesus, you get 150 million hits, and that really reflects their influence. You can go around the world, and very few people have actually heard about the Rebbe. But you can go to every nation, every people, every language group, even far-flung tribes. They know the name of Jesus, and through Jesus, they've come to worship the one true God, the God of Israel. That's saying something. Not only so, but the scriptures indicated that the Messiah should have come 2,000 years ago, whereas the Rebbe lived and died in the 20th century. So who is it who came when the scriptures said he should come, who according to the scriptures died, rose from the dead, was rejected by his people Israel, but received by the Gentiles? It's the same one who's going to come in the clouds of heaven and set up his kingdom in Jerusalem. The Rebbe or Yeshua? You decide.
We should always be prepared for Messiah coming. I mean, that's a grand tenet of the Orthodox faith, is that to always be prepared. And it could happen any day, so we should always be on our best.
Jesus as a Jew is my God. I mean, he's my God. I mean, I don't really think of him as a Jew. I think of him as my God. That's all. You know, I mean,
okay.
Why don't you get yourself into a shul?
Listen, it's because I was here in Lubavitch in '73. I was the only
Is your mother Jewish?
Yes, my mother and
Did
father.
you put on tefillin today?
No, I didn't.
Okay, if you wanted to, if you wanted,
I'll leave. I told him gladly do it before.
right,
Okay?
right.
Sure.
How you follow that?
Okay. Forgive it. God bless you.